yet.
I haven't, no.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I thank you for being here for this is my official launch of Ego at Work. And somebody asked me what inspired me to write this book, and I would just have to tell you that it's because I'm a business consultant / life coach, and I say / life coach because we're people, right? This is our life. And so I would see the ego at work all the time, and not meaning just at work literally, but at work in our lives. And it was the patterns that I would see that were keeping people from really manifesting what they said that they wanted to create, and kind of just getting in their own way and not really understanding how they were doing that. And so when I was asked to come into these companies and do coaching, much of it, you know, was actually sitting down with these people and describing these dynamics and explaining it to them. And they would be so grateful that I actually put words to it, so it made it tangible. And they started to achieve their goals because they were not only relating to themselves differently, but they were relating to each other differently. So they could collaborate better and innovate better. And then it was several years ago, about 10 years ago, and I was working at a hospital and a bunch of doctors, and they asked me to come in because, of course, these doctors knew their job very well, but they were having a difficult time working together. And they were having a difficult time being patient with the customer. So they said, hey, can you come in and teach them a few things? And when I did, several of them pulled me aside and said, can you help me with this at home? And I said, well, what did you have in mind exactly? And they said, well, you know, I'm having a problem with my marriage. I'm having a problem with my teenager, you know. And I said, well, I got to be real honest with you. When it came to that marriage department, I didn't do so well. But I raised 2 lovely daughters. And they said to me, you know what? All you got to do is teach us what you taught us here at work. And if you can teach us how to be that way with self and be that way with others, I think that's all we need. We've tried therapy and everything else, and it hasn't worked. So that kind of developed the life coaching part of my business. So after all of that, I had a little situation myself that kind of brought me to my knees. And I got to really see the ego in me. Isn't that fun how that works? You know, teacher, student, same, right? And it was, my business was soaring, the phone was ringing off the wall, and then the economy hit. And suddenly everybody in these companies were pulling back. You know, I mean, they were having a hard time paying the lights, right? And they were cutting employees, and their business loans were cut back, but they still had to pay for the brick and mortar. So they were saying to me, Susan, we want to keep you on, but instead of having you come in every other week and dealing with our C-level and our VP and our employees, we're just going to cut that back, you know, about 50%. So it was very humbling, and I got to see my ego. And I always go like this, because our ego's at the left side of us, I say. It's there flapping its arm in fear of, oh my gosh, now what? Now what? And at that time, I had this person who came into my life, and I was on the board of directors. His name is George Dalton. And he was the founder and CEO for Fiserv. And Fiserv, if you look at your online banking, down at the very, very little corner, it says Fiserv. They're the people who developed online banking and our ATM machines as we know today. So go figure, I'm on this board with him, right? Doesn't give me the time of day. I go, hi, George. You know, who's that? You know? And it wasn't until my daughter, Alex, became Miss Wisconsin that he's like, oh, you're Miss Wisconsin's mom. That became my new name. And then when she went to the Miss USA competition, guess who won? A gal by the name of Dalton. And of course that was his last name. So that became our tease with each other, that Dalton won out world. And so by that time he's like, I want to get to know you a little better. So he took me out for lunch one day and he asked me a wonderful question. He said, if you could change anything in what you do, what would you change? I said, you know, my biggest frustration with what I do is companies call me in. I work with these dynamics, help people to be more conscious of self, be more conscious of each other. And I said, but then we set these goals and everybody agrees on what they're going to do, but then the problem is nobody does it. Have you ever been in a workplace situation like that? And it's, oh, I didn't have time, or this came up and this came up, and then it's all excuses. And I said, it's frustrating because that plan that we did goes in the drawer and nobody looks at it until the next meeting. And he goes, well, what did you do about that? And I said, I don't know. I see this in my mind's eye. I see this digital dashboard that aligns people to the vision and the purpose and the goals, and everybody collaborates together and they innovate in terms of who's going to do what by when. And because they're engaged, there's no ego. Because they're engaged and there's no ego. And so people really bought in to what they say they're going to do. He said, perfect. I want you to write me a business plan. I want you to create that. I go, no, I just have the idea. I know nothing about technology. He goes, write me a plan. So I did. Long story short, he signed up to be an investor and the chairman of my board. And 3 weeks later, he found out he had heart disease. And he ended up getting surgery, and he ended up in the hospital in ICU for 7 months. And at that time, I was so humbled because here's this leader who had his own private plane, I think 2 of them, a hangar, 6 houses, you know, all over the United States, laying in bed for 7 months, looking at the tiles in the ceiling. And that's when I really got to see his character. Because you'd walk in the door and he'd say, how are you today? I want to know what's going on with you. How can I help you? And that didn't change to the day that he died. And as I got to know people that knew him, they said that was the kind of leader that he was. And that was a pivotal moment for me because it gave me hope that we could really lead and be different, even in corporate America. You know, I was working with these doctors and I could see them shifting out of their egos and being different. And I was seeing somebody like him who actually led that way, and I thought, I have to write about this. So the book has 20 tools that I used in my coaching to help people make this shift. Probably my favorite one is called the Ego Workout, which I'll explain to you in a moment. And it's told with 4 stories that really impacted my life. The first one, and I changed the names and some of the details, of course, to protect my clients and got permission from all of them. But the first story is really a story about aligning to your purpose. And it's a story about Robert, who was on the top of his game in his company, but he merged with another company. And when he merged with another company, he got in this place of the unknown. And the unknown is this fertile ground that brings up our ego. Do you understand why that is? Because when we're in the unknown, you know, this fear starts to come up inside of us, and it begins to swell this unconscious belief we have inside that we're not enough. So even the very most confident people start to have that chatterbox in their head. And we all have a different way that we deal with that insecurity, and I talk about that in the book, but there's 3 aspects to the ego. One is the big ego, where we mask that ego and we pretend, or we mask that fear rather, and we pretend that that fear is not there. And then there's the little ego, where we immediately go into limited thinking and we act like a victim, and the world and God and everybody else and circumstances is doing this to me, right? And then there's our ego strength, where somehow we acknowledge these obstacles, and it's not that we don't feel, right? We feel fear, that's to be human, right? But we get beyond the fear, and we get beyond the obstacle because we focus on how might I create what I want to create, and we align to our purpose. And in that focus of alignment and in that question, all of a sudden intuitive self comes into play, and we begin to hear possibilities that we never heard before. And that's the journey that you see with Robert in the very first story. You know, he's stuck and he's in his big ego and he's barking at everybody and he's blaming people for what they're not doing in the timeline that he expects. And he's wondering, why aren't they performing? Why aren't they performing, and why aren't they doing what they ought to do? And I'm the coach in the book, and I'm saying to him, what if, instead of trying to get them to change, what if you took a deeper look inside of yourself first to figure out what's going on inside of you? And what if you shift that fear so that you can approach them differently? What might you create? And when you see in the story, that he begins to really collaborate with people, and he begins to engage them, and people become innovative and they get over the obstacles together. So that's like one of the most common scenarios that I see at work. And it might not be a merger and acquisition, but you know, there's goals to meet, right? And how do we go about doing that? So the second story is a story about Sandy. And if you read it really carefully, and if you've read my books before, you might wonder if that story is about me. But I love the way I wrote that story, because we all have this coach within us. It's kind of this over voice, this intuitive voice, that if we check in with it, we really do know the answers, right? Have you heard that voice inside of you? You know, we all have this chatterbox voice, that's fear, and it has a certain tone to it. And then when we take a deep breath and we pause and we ask, we actually hear intuitive that guides us in what to do. And what we see in the story of Sandy is that we see this woman who really has a purpose. She's passionate about what she wants to do. But she has an ego script that is very common to women. And that's that it's not okay to be strong. And it's not okay to be independent. Because if you're strong and independent, we have a B word we use for women in that. What is that? It's not beautiful. What is that? And she's struggling with self in this book. She's struggling because she really wants to spread her wings and be all that she can be, but she's dealing with this love relationship. So we've got even a little love story in the book. And of course, he's really a hot fireman. And you see this passion, and she's having a hard time just staying with the passion within herself. And so you see this passion in this relationship, and it's a way from her, for her to get away from her own fear that's in there. You know, saying to her, gee, are you enough? Are you enough to make this happen? To really make your purpose come true? And as he pulls away in the relationship and wants an independent, she does a little freak out. So in the book, what you see is you see Coach Susan working with her and grounding her and raising her level of consciousness through some of these tools like the ego workout, but also through a wellness program. Because as women, one of our scripts in our ego is that, you know, we're not supposed to put ourselves first, right? And we look for love and validation outside of ourselves instead of knowing how to give that love and nurture and wellness and validation to self. So you see Sandy make this transformation out of her ego script into really, really loving herself. And at the end of the story, she's like, okay, well, you know, if he gets it together, great. If he doesn't, this is something better. And she's really free from all of that because she's really in relationship with self. One of my favorite stories. All of us can relate, right, ladies? Okay. Chapter number 3 is a story about power. And David, I think you'll relate to this. David is a nonprofit organization called Variety. By the way, you should all look it up. This is not a story about David because and his company. I just want to be really clear because I wrote this story before I even met David and was introduced to his company. However, this is a story that we see a lot. And it just so happens this one is about Joanna. And Joanna is in a nonprofit, and they asked me to come into this nonprofit. And they love the vision, right? Most people who work for a nonprofit, they love the vision, but they're not meeting their goals. And the reason that they're not meeting their goals is they're caught up in an ego script. And the ego script has to do with limited thinking, that we don't have enough resources. And we don't have enough people, and we don't have enough time, and our volunteers aren't doing enough. And so therefore it's not our fault that we're not meeting our goals. And so I have to work with everybody in the organization to help them shift their mindset to look at it is what it is. So how might I within what I have? So you see more of a little visit into the little ego in that story with Joanna. And then the very last story in the book is a story about John, and that's a story and a journey of peace. And John was a client where I was actually at a wedding, and it was a wedding of a client of mine who owned an oil company. And we're at the wedding, and the music is starting, and if anybody knows me, I love to dance. And all of a sudden, there was this guy out there, and he was dancing, and he was kind of doing a little Michael Jackson, going back and forth the way you do that. And so I started to go out and I started to dance with him. My client came over and introduced us, and he said, "Oh, Susan works for your company. What does she do?" And he said, "Well, she takes the ego out of work so we can get to work." And he said, "Oh, really?" And he goes, "Do you work with individuals?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "Well, my son used to be a big developer in Milwaukee." And he said, long story short, lost the big gig, and he's without a job right now. Would you work with him? I said, "Well, he has to sign up for this. So have him call me and we'll have a conversation." Long story short, started working with him, and he was really already an intuitive. He had this ability to tap in and really listen and be creative. So we worked with his vision, what he wanted to create in his life. And he would spend a lot of time doing nothing. And for guys, doing nothing is kind of playing, right? He'd play with his boat, he'd play with his little games on his computer. He'd go in the garage. And to him, that's how he created this sort of mindless nothingness. So intuitive could come to him, and his wife didn't get it. She was like, "Well, you don't have a job, you need a job, you're doing nothing. How come you're not on the computer pounding it away?" And I said, "You need to explain to her you're trusting it will come to you. It will come to you." Did you ever struggle with that, where you're like, "I really want it to come to me. I don't want to have to pound the pavement"? So not too much longer after we started working together, I get this phone call from him. "Susan, you are not going to believe it. I'm up north. I'm at my wife's family's farm. Knock, knock, knock on the door." And it was an oil company, and they wanted to test the sand. And he said, "It was just like you knew it. In that moment, I knew, just like you said it. This was my opportunity." And I turned to my father-in-law and I said, "Let me have this deal. I can do this." So he contacted all the farmers. Long story short, he tested all the soil, found out it was mineable for frack. So he was the one who did that whole deal, and he had imagined in his mind's eye that this would be the deal where he would become a millionaire, and he was only 40 years old, not even quite 40 at the time. But when we had done our work together, and he had tapped in, he was going to have one deal that was going to be the multi-millionaire deal, and he was going to be able to retire. Well, long story short, as we're getting into the deal and we're having problems, of course the ego shows up everywhere, right? And the farmers, while they agreed to it, what do you think maybe they were afraid of? How people are going to be on my land? What's going to happen? They're in the unknown, right? Is this really going to work? Is it going to pay off? And what's my land going to look like? And what's going to happen, right? And when we're in fear, all these dynamics starts to show up, and I'm coaching him on how to work with that so it's not triggering his own fear. In the midst of all that, his wife gets pregnant. And his wife is older than him. And it was a risk pregnancy. And they said, "This is not looking good." So the baby gets born. Right in the middle of this is they're trying to close the deal with an oil company. And they find out that likely his son is not going to last forever. When what you see at the end of the story is this complete surrender. And I have to say it's my favorite part of the book, because in order to really become aware of our ego, and again I say our ego is always flapping over here. There's something that has to happen in our life where we want to turn around and we want to take a look at it. And when our ego seems to have been helping us in strategy get to where we want to go, maybe it's not always pleasant, maybe people don't always like it, but look at where I am. It's kind of working for me, right? And we don't want to give it up. But when something like that happens and we hit this point of powerlessness, we're open and we're willing to surrender what we've been doing and look at things differently. And he opened his mindset. And he was willing to suddenly approach the farmers differently, the people he was working with, and not even the people, but himself, and how he was holding success, and how he was holding money, and his need to control the outcome in the timing and the way that he wanted. And you saw this person completely open and saying, "I'm yours. I'm yours. What do I need to do today?" And living moment by moment. I won't tell you the end of the story, because that would be like taking you, to a movie, or telling you to go to a movie, telling you to end the movie, right? But at the end of the story, you really, really see the journey of the surrender to the ego. So I wrote the book the way I did because I really wanted a way to not only teach the tools of how to shift from our ego into our intuitive self and ego strength, but I wanted to tell stories in which we could all relate, that were really common to us and that affected us in our life, whether it was romantic or working with other people, or even maybe our hopes ourselves to be a millionaire, and thinking that somehow reaching that outcome was going to be the end-all for us. So it's my 6th book, and I have to say it's my favorite. And I'm really excited about it because for me, it really aligns me to my purpose, because I just love to teach people to have a higher awareness of self, to listen to that intuitive voice, because when we do that, we don't feel alone. When we do that, we really do feel a sense of passion and power and peace that we can't find outside of ourselves. And my belief is that if people knew how to do this more, we would have less dis-ease that would turn into disease. And it would be a whole heck of a lot more fun to be in relationship with other people, because it would be a whole heck of a lot more fun to be in relationship with self. So I really appreciate you being here. I hope you have a chance to peek through the book. If you are interested in buying it, we've actually sold out our stock already, but you can order it right there at the front desk, and they'll ship it right to your home. And I just really hope you help me spread the word. I really am committed to following this book. So thank you so much for being here. And David wrote a testimonial because I did speak to his organization, so I want to thank you so much for that. I'm very, very grateful. So, does anybody have any questions about the book?
I don't have a question. I just want to say I'm grateful to you for putting this work out there like you're doing, and putting this into storytelling. And because we really, really need this material.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
A great contribution.
Thank you. And that's a really nice compliment coming from Runa, because Runa is a conscious leader, coach, and consultant herself, so she really resonates to this message. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. And Jeff, I was on Jeff's show yesterday. Jeff actually interviewed me. It's called, tell them about your show.
It's called Book Circle on